In December, I was in India as a guest of the Guptas who are here this morning. My son's parents, not in-laws, my daughter's in-laws. We had a wonderful month in India. Betty and I had been there 50 years ago. While I was in India, one of my very dear old friends, Mohandas Gandhi, called and said, come have lunch with us. We had a wonderful lunch. Hadn't seen each other for 40 years. He's better looking than he was 40 years ago. All that. But in the lunch, he says to me, Blanton, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Now, when you get my age, you're going to ask that question. They're not going to ask these kids what they're worried about next week. But what are you going to do with the rest of your life? I said, Raj, something stirs in my spirit, and it's what the Librarian of Congress said at the turn of the century on world television when asked, what's the most important issue for the 21st century? He said immediately, the most important issue will be whether the youth of the Western world can communicate and build common ground with the Muslim world. This commentator was taken back and said, did you say that again? He said, yes. Most important issue, can the youth of the Western world communicate and find common ground with the youth of the Muslim world? And I said to Raj Gandhi, that's really what I'd like to commit myself. He stood up, reached across that table, shook my hand and said, I want to do the same. Here's a man who's a statesman who comes out of India. He has been in Parliament. He's written 9 books. He's a professor at the University of Illinois. He's a father of a daughter and a son, both of whom are in school over here. One in Harvard, one at the University of Michigan. He's here with his wife, and it's an honor to ask him to come up and say a word.
Blanton says that I look better than I'd ever looked, so you can imagine what I looked like when I was... Many thoughts go through my mind. I've of course been very stirred, very heartened by this morning. Both stirred and heartened. In particular, I feel very grateful that I can get a tiny glimpse of the amazing, continuing and unfinished life work of my dear friend Blanton Belk. I've known Blanton and Betty for 50 years, so I knew Betty before she was born. And we worked together for some years in different parts of the world. And then we were not in regular touch, but I was aware of the amazing things he was attempting. But this morning is my first chance in a very long time to get an idea of some of the amazing things that God has used him to do. So I do want to salute you, Blanton. And Betty likewise. Now, the relevant issues of the day, as Blanton mentioned, and he mentioned this issue of the Muslim world and the rest of the world, as it's often described. There's one difference, a great difference between the Cold War time and today. I'm sure some of you, if you've thought about it, you've realized it, and I will spell out the difference. During the Cold War time, the US government, Soviet government, had a profound difference, and they almost came to war, and they continued with the Cold War for a long time. But as between the people of the Western world and the people of the communist world, there was no profound mistrust or fear or enmity. The confrontation was between the governments. But today, when it comes to the so-called Islamic world, I say so-called because it's not a monolith, it's not one thing, it's many things. And the Western world, which again is not a monolith. But the great difference today is that the mistrust, the suspicion, the fear is between peoples. And many people in the countries that have Muslim majorities have for decades now been told that the Western world is a bad world, it's a satanic world, and there is persistent propaganda about the religions in the Western world. Likewise, in the Western world, there is a suggestion, sometimes a strong suggestion, sometimes a persistent suggestion that there is something wrong with Muslims as a people, with Islam as a religion. So that's the great contrast between the Cold War time and today. During that time, it was a very serious time, but the wall, the great divide was between governments, and today the great divide is between people. So there is a tremendous task for all of us, as far as the future is concerned, to build a bridge across that great divide. I'll just say one more thing, and that's about my grandfather Gandhi. You know how deeply connected Gandhi was to the United States, though he never made a visit to the US. He was influenced by, among others, Abraham Lincoln, Booker T. Washington, by Henry David Thoreau, and of course, Martin Luther King Jr. Unites Gandhi with the United States in his own life because of the inspiration he drew from Gandhi. Now, Gandhi had three great battles. He wanted to liberate India from foreign rule. It was British rule. He wanted to unite the Hindus and the Muslims of India. And he also wanted justice between the so-called high castes and the so-called low castes and the quote-unquote untouchables. That's a great story that some of you are familiar with. Liberate India from British rule, reconcile Hindus and Muslims, bring justice and reconciliation between the high castes and the untouchables. But Gandhi's great secret was that he was prepared to speak the truth to his own side. He didn't merely say that the British had done wrong things and should leave India. He also tackled Indians on the errors that they also had committed. He was a Hindu. He didn't merely say that the Muslims should treat Hindus fairly. He wanted the Hindus to treat the Muslims fairly. And he belonged to the so-called high castes, and he wanted the so-called high caste to face the wrongs they had done towards the so-called low castes and the so-called untouchables. So one of the great lessons of Gandhi's life was speak the truth to your own side. Thank you very much, and all power.